Good morning. The meeting of the Select Committee on Rail Safety will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Reineke.
Here.
Vice Chair Ruley.
Here.
Senator Landis. Here. Senator Copeland.
Here.
Senator Hawkins-Chuckton. Senator Rosenberg.
Here.
Ranking member.
A copy of the minutes from the March 22nd meeting are on your iPads. Will the minutes be agreed to? Without objection, the minutes are agreed to. I'd like to state the mission of the Select Committee, and it's to gather a complete understanding of why the derailment in East Palestine happened, where the recovery stands now, and exactly how the Ohio General Assembly can help best the people of East Palestine recover, and to plan in the event of a future disaster. And our first testifier today is Alan Shaw, the CEO of Norfolk Southern. Mr. Shaw gives his testimony. We'll call on each member to ask questions. And I would ask that we start off asking just one or two questions so we can keep this meeting moving. We have a hard stop at 12:45. After this, the floor will be open to any other questions. Additionally, please be aware that Mr. Shaw may not be able to answer certain questions pending litigation. And with that, Mr. Shaw, please proceed. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Chair Reineke, Vice Chair Ruley, Ranking Member Antonio, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Alan Shaw, and I've been President and CEO of Norfolk Southern since May of 2022. I want to begin today by expressing how deeply sorry I am for the impact the derailment in East Palestine has had on the people in the area, and how deeply committed I am to making this right. I was on the ground in East Palestine soon after the accident, and I've been back to East Palestine almost every week since. I've visited with community leaders, business owners, school officials, farmers, clergy, families, and others throughout the area. They've shared their stories and they've shared their concerns about the health of their families, their businesses, and the future of the community they love. I've talked with the first responders. We've hosted a dinner for them and their families just last week, and I've thanked them for their bravery. The residents I've spoken with are passionate about East Palestine, and I share their passion for this community. We have hundreds of Norfolk Southern employees and contractors working in East Palestine 7 days a week to address the community's needs. And I am proud to have personally donated almost $450,000 to fund scholarships for East Palestine students. You have my personal commitment that we will get the job done and help this community thrive. Norfolk Southern continues to make good on its promise to clean up the site safely, thoroughly, and with urgency. Together with the U.S. EPA, the Ohio EPA, Pennsylvania DEP, we have implemented a comprehensive testing program. I am encouraged that air and water monitoring conducted by local, state, and federal agencies, as well as by our contractors, has consistently shown to date that both the air and drinking water are safe. Last week, we achieved a major milestone in the remediation process by completing excavation of the impacted soil beneath the removed south track. We will not stop until the job is done. Although financial assistance can't change what happened, we believe it is an important part of doing the right thing. We have committed to reimbursements and investments of more than $30 million so far, including by helping more than 7,600 families through our Family Assistance Center. We are committed to the community's long-term improvement. For example, we are working with community leaders to make a significant investment in East Palestine Park for the benefit of the entire region. If community members have a concern, we want them to come talk to us. Our website, nsmakingitright.com, provides the latest information and details on how to reach us. We're fully cooperating with the NTSB's investigation into the cause of the derailment. The NTSB's preliminary report, released in February, reflected that the Norfolk Southern crew was operating the train within our protocols and below the speed limit established by federal law. The wayside detectors installed on the track to identify overheated axles operated properly, and the crew took the appropriate action when they received the alarm. Yet it is clear from this incident we can always improve on safety. So as the NTSB continues its work, we are not waiting to act. Shortly after the derailment, I instructed my team to look at steps we can take to improve safety, beginning immediately. The initiatives we have already announced are just a start, and we look forward to working with policymakers and the industry on others. We strive to make our safety culture the best in the industry. Since becoming CEO, I've made reliable and resilient service our goal, and we work every day to improve safety, service to our customers, and the quality of life for our frontline railroaders. I value the hours I've spent in crew rooms all over our 22-state network, thanking our frontline railroaders and asking for their advice. They're proud of the important work they do for this country, and they take safety seriously. I'm going to continue to make sure that they get the right training and the right processes and the right equipment and the right technology. You have my commitment on that. Today, I'm proud to represent more than 19,700 Norfolk Southern employees who work every day to offer a safe and reliable means of transporting goods across our great country. This includes more than 2,700 employees who call Ohio home. Our Ohio ties run deep. We just opened a new training center in Bellevue, Ohio, to offer free training to first responders. Last year, our capital investments in the state totaled more than $210 million. In the last year, we've served over 1,500 companies in Ohio, including the agriculture, auto, consumer, steel, and coal markets. And in that time, we've handled more than 450,000 cars loaded with their business, representing billions of dollars of support for the Ohio economy. We will continue to invest in the future of Ohio, just as we have always done. Norfolk Southern is here for the long haul. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Questions from the committee? Senator Hoagland.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. According to your testimony, you had been there from the very get-go of this incident all the way through present day. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Senator. Could you
So
repeat?
what I'm looking for is my mic. Maybe it's not working. Oh, here we go. All right. I'll use my man voice. So, sounds like to me you'd been at this East Palestine since the very get-go of the incident all the way to present day. My question is where did you and what did you see as pertaining to the chain of command as the events unfolded? From the time the initial incident happened, when the chief, I guess, was in charge, to this unified command of who's actually in charge now?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, I've been involved from the very beginning. We rushed to the scene, and we have to express our appreciation for the first responders who rushed to the scene. There are dozens of fire departments from Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia who rushed to the scene, and I sincerely appreciate what they did for the citizens of East Palestine. I think you're referring to Unified Command. Unified Command, that structure was set up under a presidential directive through the Department of Homeland Security in 2003, and it's under the command of the incident commander, who is Fire Chief Draybeck, who's been a hero throughout this process.
So if I understand you correctly, the chief is still in charge of the unified command?
The Unified Command was changed by the EPA's Unified Administrative Order, and so now Unified Command consists of the US EPA, the Ohio EPA, the Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency, the Village of East Palestine, and Norfolk Southern. I can tell you that the governor remains very much involved in this, and I'm in close contact with him frequently with updates.
Follow-up, Senator Hoagland.
Maybe I'm not getting clear here. So what I'm trying to figure out is what the chain of command actually is. The federal side, you're telling me right now, the federal side is in charge of telling Norfolk Southern what they got to do?
Mr. Chair, Senator, we are working on the environmental remediation under the oversight of the US EPA, and we are making tremendous progress. We've hauled over 27,000 tons of soil off-site, over 12 million gallons of water off-site. As you know, as I talk to the community, and I've spent a lot of time there, as you noted, we had an original plan to leave the soil under the tracks, and we were following an environmentally accepted remediation plan. As I walked through the community and talked to folks and sat in their family rooms, it was really clear to me that the folks in the community were not comfortable with that approach. They wanted that soil out from underneath the tracks. And so I went back to my team and said, we got to come up with a new plan. We're going to listen to this community, because from day one, our North Star has been, we're going to do what's right, and we're going to do more than less. And that's how we've been operating. And so we came up with a plan to remove the soil from underneath each of our 2 tracks. And just late last week, we achieved a major milestone by completing the soil removal and the rebuild of track 1, and now we're moving over to track 2. We're doing exactly what we said we were going to do.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I ask one more?
Could I just maybe summarize that question real quick? The idea was that the Unified Command, are there recommendations that you would change in the way that Unified Command process through, either with the Homeland Security and at the state level, with who should be in charge of what and where it would go? I think that might help us understand a little bit better.
Oh, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm not in a position to offer commentary on that. We're working very closely with the US EPA and the Ohio EPA, and we have a great direct leader of the Ohio EPA, Ann Vogel, and we're making a lot of progress.
Senator Antonio.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your testimony and, excuse me, for being here today. I definitely appreciate the sentiment and what you've expressed in terms of being on the ground, listening to the people of East Palestine. As you just indicated, I think we're all thankful that they pushed for the removal of the soil, which would affect the community, but we know that ultimately it could affect any areas that the trains travel through. So kudos to them and to you for listening to them. I live in a community where the trains travel through. I live 5 houses from the railroad tracks in Lakewood, Ohio. The city of Cleveland I represent as well. Densely populated communities. And it's nothing short of a miracle that there was not loss of life in East Palestine. We can all be incredibly thankful for that. But going forward, I think one of the concerns I hear from the people in my community as we look at this and we hear from around the state is, how has Norfolk Southern changed the way you handle messages, real specifically from the wayside detectors, but also just what kinds of improvements are being made in the whole culture of safety with regard to the rail safety right now in the state of Ohio?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for that question. I'm terribly sorry that this accident occurred and the impact it has had on the community. It's a traumatic event. despite the fact there was no loss of life. I understand that. We are a safe railroad. Norfolk Southern is a safe railroad. Last year, the derailments on Norfolk Southern were the lowest they've been in 2 decades, and we can get better. Last year, the employee injury rate on Norfolk Southern was the lowest it's been in the last decade, and we can get better. Last year, the number of train accidents on Norfolk Southern and Ohio declined 40%, and we can get better. Within my first year of CEO, I have completely refreshed the operations leadership at Norfolk Southern with a mandate to improve service and a mandate to improve safety. We're going to get better. As soon as the preliminary NTSB report came out, we instituted a 6-point safety plan because we're not going to wait on the final report. And that included additional wayside detectors. Already, the spacing of Norfolk Southern's wayside detectors was among the lowest in industry, closest together. And I asked our team to increase the number of wayside detectors by 25%. We're looking at best practices in the industry on wayside detector technology. We have joined the Federal Railroad Administration's confidential close call reporting system. We're putting up a train inspection portal in a partnership with Georgia Tech Research Institute, which will use automated intelligence to look for factors on trains that the human eye couldn't catch. We're taking very concrete, very discrete steps to improve our safety, because we will always invest to get better. Every year, we invest over $1 billion in safety, and our ongoing expenses related to safety are $1 billion. It's very important to us, and you're seeing results when you see improvement.
Follow up, Senator Antonio.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. I appreciate the path that you've gone through to talk about this increased safety. I'm a little confused by, and so maybe you can clarify for me. My understanding, we've received information that there's been as much as a 30 to 40% cut on safety in the last few years with regard to car inspections, railroad workforce. I'm sorry, not the car inspections, but actually a 30 to 40% decrease in rail workers. And then the crews, I would like to know, so first I'd like you to address whether there have been cuts to workforce. And I understand if you're saying you're looking at some of these things to go to technology, but one of the things I think this legislature has really been clear about is that we understand the value of human workers to continue to be available. So can you talk about whether or not there's been a decrease in workforce, and also can you say a little bit about what kinds of measures the actual crew that were on the train in East Palestine, what kinds of assistance have they received since the accident, in terms of whether it was time off, or what kinds of assistance are they receiving right now? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, my craft colleagues, our union employees, are the foundation of Norfolk Southern. I sincerely respect and appreciate what they do for Norfolk Southern, for the U.S. economy, and for our customers 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I became CEO less than a year ago. My first day as CEO, I was out in the field, in the crew rooms, thanking our craft colleagues. I was in Conneaut, Ohio. 6 months later, I returned to Conneaut, Ohio, and cooked steaks for our crews there, because they have been injury-free for the last 10 years, and we had a safety cookout. That's how important safety is to us. how important our colleagues are to me is ever since I became CEO, we've been on a hiring spree. Right now, we have a near record number of conductor trainees in our pipeline. And so while you see other industries during this economic environment are laying people off, we are aggressively hiring. And just within the last year, we've added 1,500 employees to Norfolk Southern's ranks. 6 months after I became CEO, late last year, we announced a new plan. We charted a new course in the industry with less of a focus on near-term operating margins and more of a long-term holistic approach to service, productivity, and growth. And at the foundation of that is our engagement with our employees in a safe and reliable railroad.
Senator Rogner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Shaw, for being here today. And also, I would like to echo my colleague's sentiments. I appreciate that you started out your testimony by saying you're sorry and expressing genuine remorse, everything from the $450,000 to where you said, we'll not stop until the job is done. So thank you for that. But just as importantly is looking forward to making sure this doesn't happen again. Anywhere in our state or in our country. And you mentioned that you're focusing on improving training, equipment, technology. You said that at a high level. Over the course of some of these questions I've heard, my question was going to be, can you give us more details about that? I did hear you also mention you're going to add wayside detectors, you're going to follow best practice, you're doing a train inspection portal. Can you tell me specifically this wayside detector, You said in your testimony that they function the way they should, but yet somehow it doesn't sound like the train engineer got the message that those bearings were heating up. Otherwise, the train would have stopped sooner. So where was that breakdown, and how is that going to be improved specifically? And then also, what specific training are you guys going to be giving the people of Norfolk Southern to prevent such a disaster from happening again?
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for the question. The preliminary NTSB report said that the crew acted exactly as they were supposed to. And as soon as the train went by the wayside detector, the message went directly to the crew, and they started the process of slowing the train down. By that time, regrettably, the bearing had already failed, and the train was in the process of derailing. The NTSB is focused on a specific car that Norfolk Southern doesn't own, nor does any other railroad. And they're looking at the metallurgy of the wheel set. That's why I firmly believe that enhancements to safety throughout the rail industry are going to require an industry-wide response, which includes car owners, our valuable customers, car builders, and railroads. After I'm done with you today, I'm heading to Washington, D.C. I'm going to go to the Hill, and I'm going to express a full-throated endorsement for many of the safety provisions that are in the Vance-Brown bill and in the Johnson-Sykes bill. I'm going to take an industry-leading role here to continue to advance safety in the rail industry.
Follow-up, Senator Rogner.
Thank you for that answer. The second part of my question, though, is around training. So you mentioned training also as a piece of your testimony. Is there anything specific you can tell us about how you would improve training?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Senator. We have a training facility just south of our headquarters in McDonough, Georgia. And as we hire new employees, they spend a lot of time training there, and they spend time training out in the field.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Rulli.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming. You know how personal this is to me. Real quick, as far as Senator Rogner's question goes, I'm a little confused on the process of the detector picking it up and your guys getting it. Is it immediate, or does it go to Atlanta, then that process comes into the conductor, the throttle engineer?
Mr. Chair, Senator, if the wheel bearing is above our threshold which is amongst the lowest in all of industry, and it goes directly to the crews. And that's exactly what happened in East Palestine. And again, I thank our crew because they handled this properly and appropriately.
Follow up?
Senator Rulli, follow up.
So then I'm going to ask two completely different questions, and you can elaborate however you want. The first question would be, when I was with Ann Vogel a couple weeks ago, she said the number one problem was that we had truckloads of contaminated soil that had to get out of town, and it was recontaminating the town. Now that's changed. If you could walk us all through the minutia of that and how that proceeded. And a huge question for myself in particular is, could you explain to the committee, when you look at these rail cars, that there are vents on top of the cars that if the car falls over, and I know we all see this through our communities, and you can see what a box car looks like versus what a tanker car looks like. And I was explaining that, you know, the chemicals inside and it's gas pressured and it's supposed to be safe, and you have these flaps. And I was explaining that if the car falls over, the flaps are supposed to let out that gas, and the car will not explode or catch on fire or anything like that at all. So that was a failure. And I've been told, and I've been approached from my office, that the industry that makes these cars has every intention on trying to improve that. So those are 2 points of focus, if you could elaborate on.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I've been there quite a bit. I share your passion for the community. I enjoy getting up to East Palestine every chance that I get to. I appreciated our conversation this morning. I know how important that environmental remediation is to you. Every day, we've got 300 Norfolk Southern employees, and contractors, in the community working on the environmental remediation. They're working on community assistance, and they're working on helping East Palestine thrive. And they're making a difference. And what I find is when those employees leave East Palestine, they're there 7 days a week, and they take time to go home and visit their families, they want to get back as quickly as possible. In fact, I've heard stories of people cutting vacations short so they could get back to East Palestine because they share your passion for the community. And what that tells me is that they know that they're making a positive impact on the community and the environmental remediation. And that tells me that the community recognizes that and has given them positive feedback as well. As we stood this process up under the oversight of the US EPA and partnering very closely with Ann Vogel and the Ohio EPA, we've ramped up the movement of soil off-site. And I'm pleased to report to you now that we're getting close to 1,000 tons off-site on a daily basis. And we're making great progress. We've moved over 27,000 tons off-site. I know how important that is to the community, and we provide updates on our environmental remediation, the progress, every single day on nsmakingitright.com. I would invite you to go there, and it will provide you an update every single day on the progress we're making and the environmental remediation and what the next steps are. Because our goal throughout this whole process has been to make it right, do more than less, which means we're going to do more than the norm on the environmental remediation. We're going to do more than the norm on the community response. And I am personally going to be more involved than the norm. And our goal has been to be as transparent as possible with the community. So we have the website, we have our Family Assistance Center, which has been open 7 days a week ever since the day after the derailment, and has helped over 7,600 families in the area.
Senator Hicks Hudson.
Thank you. I have such a low chair. Thank you so much for being here for your testimony. And I do appreciate your commitment to safety, because that's one of the main things that I'm concerned about. I come from Northwest Ohio, Lucas County, where we have rail and, we're a transportation hub. And there's some concerns not only about what happened in East Palestine, but also the issue of safety in terms of the transportation of hazardous materials. And you're saying that you're going to be going to Washington to speak. Do you have any concerns or thoughts about maybe rerouting some of these types of hazardous materials so that they're not necessarily going through either dense populations or, for me, going over the Sandusky Bay, which could end, if there were a train derailment or a problem, that instead of it going into the soil, it could go into the water and further affect Lake Erie. So the first question I have is, as it relates to potential future, maybe rerouting some of your trains that would be carrying these either high hazard or just hazardous materials to try to deal with potential problems going forward in the future.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we look at every aspect with respect to the transportation of hazardous materials on our lines. And over time, you've seen the number of derailments, the number of personal injuries, and hazardous material releases on Norfolk Southern decline. I'm going to Washington to talk about a number of factors in the Vance-Brown bill and the Johnson-Sykes bill, which would enhance safety of hazardous materials. One of which relates to the implementation of much tougher tank car standards. It relates to advanced notification for first responders who so bravely ran to the scene. It relates to increased investment in hot box detectors. There are a number of areas in which we can improve the safety of hazardous materials.
Follow up, please.
Senator Hicks Hudson, follow up.
Thank you. So am I understanding that this issue about possibly rerouting some of these trains is not on the table, or it could be considered? Because while all these other things you're talking about are mechanical and things that can help, no question about it, but they also can be subject to failure. Because I believe that, before, there was thoughts that the way that the hot boxes were set up and the way the trains and the tank cars were made and all these other things were okay. But unfortunately, that was not the case that happened in East Palestine. So this is something that is within the control of not only the rail systems, but I think it also can alleviate some of the concerns that first responders have, that communities have about their trains, these trains coming through, not necessarily knowing what's in them. So my question is, so that is not something that you're considering, or you have considered it and dismissed it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we do consider the routing of our hazardous materials. We always evaluate that. And I'll note that Norfolk Southern installed positive train control across our network on lines that carry hazardous materials in an effort to improve safety. We're always looking to improve safety. We're always looking to improve the coordination with the communities. We just opened up a regional first responders training facility in Bellevue, Ohio, to help train the first responders from Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. And that was done based on direct feedback that I got from Chief Drabeck, who was the incident commander.
Follow up, if I may.
Can we come back to that? Sure. Senator Landis.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Shaw, for being here today and your testimony. It's greatly appreciated. And, listening to some of the questions and your response, you seem very dedicated to the problem-solving aspect of it. And the corrective action, while not waiting on the National Transportation Safety Board to tell you what direction to go. You're already taking it. But I have two questions here. I'll just group them together. We talk about the wayside detector, the black boxes. That is current technology, and I'm sure that it's been updated. But is there any new technology on the horizon that will be helpful to the rail industry and to our communities that's going to be available? And the second question would be, are there any federal regulations in place, or does Norfolk and Southern have their own type of policy on the number of cars that carry hazardous waste, either by weight or by volume? Is there anything like that that's out there now that limits the amount of hazardous waste that could be on one train? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I appreciated our conversation earlier today. And as I noted to you then, we are a data-driven organization. Facts matter for us, and we're going to follow the science, and we're going to follow the technology. That's important to me. And, I think I'm looking forward to seeing what we learn out of the machine visioning portal that we're developing in conjunction with the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and we're going to put that up outside of East Palestine. That's going to help us find potential issues that the human eye never could. Senator, there are a number of areas in which we apply technology and we apply safety beyond the federal regulations, and that includes locomotive-mounted, track geometry to look for potential geometry defects in the track that the human eye could never catch. And that includes using artificial intelligence to look for rail wear. So we're always going to invest in technology that we believe can enhance safety.
Senator Kunze.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Would you maybe just describe in a little greater detail exactly what malfunctioned on that tanker or on those cars that really is kind of the impetus for the argument to make sure that those cars or the tanker cars are improved in their use? Obviously, you said Norfolk Southern doesn't own them. What exactly happened and malfunctioned that caused this to be such an egregious disaster?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, Senator, immediately after the derailment, the morning of February 4th, I spoke to Chair Homendy of the National Transportation Safety Board, and I pledged my full cooperation and the full cooperation of Norfolk Southern in finding out what happened. I did the same thing with the Federal Railroad Administration. We pledged our full cooperation. The NTSB is currently investigating it. The preliminary report is focused on the 23rd car in the train, which was a privately owned car, not owned by Norfolk Southern or any other railroad, that had plastic pellets in it. And the NTSB is focused on the wheel bearing in that car as the potential source of catastrophic failure. The tanker cars, which you reference, had pressure relief valves. Those two were not owned by Norfolk Southern or any other railroad. Pressure relief valves that failed, and that was why there was a concern about a buildup of pressure as those cars had sat in a pool fire. And that's one of the reasons that the rail industry has so stridently called for advances in take car safety standards, and we will continue to do so going forward.
Follow-up?
Follow-up, Senator Kunze.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And will you also, I appreciated your discussion yesterday about your investment that you personally are making in the community, not just financially, but maybe it would be helpful for committee members to hear about some of the activities that you're doing. You referenced being there almost every week. Maybe just describe briefly what the activities that you are doing when you're there. I thought that was helpful for me to hear yesterday in my office. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, I appreciated your time yesterday. That community is really important to me. I've been up there a number of times, and I've engaged in listening sessions. Immediately in the aftermath, I went to the Family Assistance Center, which was established by Norfolk Southern. I went to the Red Cross shelter, and I told them who I was. I told the families who I was. I wanted to make sure that they knew that I, the CEO of Norfolk Southern, was there, and I was taking responsibility for helping the community recover. And I asked them if they're getting every single thing that they needed in support from Norfolk Southern. And that's been my mandate to my company going forward, is we're going to do what's right, and we're going to do more than less. What I found that has been really particularly helpful to me is small group listening sessions. And I've held those in churches, I've held those in schools, I've held those in family rooms, and I've held those in businesses. because I want to be proactively engaged, and I want my team, that the 300 people up there who are representing Norfolk Southern 7 days a week, to do the same. And that's where we're getting the feedback on what's important to the community. One of the first times I met with some of the community leaders, they took me to the East Palestine Park, and I know you've been there many times. It's this wonderful natural resource in the community. It's 81 acres, and it's utilized 4 seasons out of the year. It's got a huge pool. It's got softball fields and baseball fields, and they put up a frisbee golf, and they host what they call is the best fireworks display west of Pittsburgh every July 4th. And it's a community center, and it doesn't just draw people from East Palestine. It draws folks from the entire community. So we've done a lot of work in the park to refresh it, and we hired a master planner, and that master planner is working with city officials for a very comprehensive, very large-scale improvement to that park, and we're going to fund that. Just a couple weeks ago, the Saturday before Easter, we hosted an Easter egg hunt in the park, and it was better attended than the Easter egg hunt last year. So we're making progress, and we're continuing to listen, and we're going to continue to do what's right. Just last week, I went to our Family Assistance Center, and again, I met with some of the citizens there and asked what we could do to help. The Family Assistance Center is located in a church right now, although we're leasing space downtown because we're going to be there for the long haul. And that space is where we held our first responder family appreciation night last week. So I went to the Family Assistance Center, and I wanted to thank my team for what they're doing. I wanted to talk to the citizens of the community. And then I talked to the 2 pastors at the church, and I asked them, and I talked to them a couple times because I've met with many of the faith-based leaders in the community, because that's very important to the community. And I asked them, how is it going? And they said that 95% of the citizens who come in there know that Norfolk Southern is doing the right thing and really appreciate what they're doing. But what made me really proud is Pastor Mike and Pastor Jeff said, we're amazed at the empathy and the professionalism of the Norfolk Southern team. You guys are doing everything you can in a very difficult situation to help. And that's the values that we have in our company.
Ranking Member Antonio.
Chair. So I appreciate you just brought up the first responders, and one of my questions regarding the first responders and frankly the people of East Palestine, we've talked a lot about the concerns that we have of their ongoing health and issues around that, both the first responders and the people that live in the community. Can you say a little bit about the commitment that you have? And my hope is that it's as long as they're around and as long as they live, that there's a commitment there to really address any health needs that should come up going forward. But can you address that for us?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, you're exactly right. As I talk to the folks in the community, 3 things continue to come up with respect to long-term questions or concerns, and it is around long-term health care, it's around property values, and it's around water monitoring. And so it's important for us to address that because we're going to make it right. So under the direction of Attorney General Yost, we're working with experts and relative stakeholders on establishing long-term funds that would address just those issues: health care, water monitoring, and property values. The other way that we can help support property values in the community is investing in the community and doing things like our substantial investment in the park that I spoke about earlier.
Follow-up.
Follow-up, Senator Antonio.
So we've talked a lot about, and you've talked a lot about the commitment and the responsibility that Norfolk Southern is taking. I learned in a conversation with you yesterday that something I didn't realize was that while the train is responsible for the train, the tracks, that some of the cars you don't own, or the contents thereof. And so there are other factors involved in this, and this disaster has put a spotlight on the safety concerns. My colleagues have already talked a little bit and asked a little bit of questions around, especially when hazardous materials are traveling through communities across the state, across the country. It seems like the most important thing to also ask is there liability or accountability that we really should be expecting on the part of the folks whose chemicals are going across our communities, being transported. So what is their accountability? And the other part of my question, this focus is considering that these hazardous chemicals are being transported across our communities. Is there a conversation now on the other side of what happened in East Palestine around, should we limit either the amount of cars that have hazardous materials in them, really focusing on making those train cars so that they contain those chemicals? I mean, what kinds of things like that is the industry, are you all talking about to prevent something like this from happening again?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, I understand the spotlight's been on me and on Norfolk Southern. I understand my role, and that's okay. I understand your point about the liabilities. We're going to have plenty of opportunity to look into that. I can tell you right now, I'm completely focused on the environmental remediation, on community assistance, and investments in East Palestine to help East Palestine thrive for the long haul, and then taking an industry-leading position with respect to advancing safety standards. That includes much more advanced tank car safety standards, which we had talked about. That includes advanced notification of first responders of hazardous materials that move through communities. But that needs to be done within the construct of Department of Homeland Security concerns. Rail is a much safer form of transportation of hazardous materials than truck. And we will continue to invest to make rail safer.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Rulli.
Well, once again, thank you. Just a real quick. So when you were mentioning the tanker cars, which you don't own, and who oversees the safety of the tanker cars? And in your personal opinion, if the flaps on those cars work properly, the same situation happens, no fire, no explosion, if the flaps work properly?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, there are federal tank car safety standards, and that's one of the things that I want to advance and accelerate. With respect to the failed pressure relief devices, that very well could have contributed to a buildup of pressure in the tank cars, but I can't make a statement as to whether or not it would have prevented anything. What I'm really focused on doing is what we can do proactively to increase safety for the rail industry.
Senator Hicks Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for this commitment that you're making. One of the things, again, I'm in the north, and there's been a series of problems with the train derailment, Sandusky, and that community is still having some challenges. Is there any thought about, not only the first response that the company makes to derailment, but for the long haul. Because as I think you know that in Sandusky, there's only one way that you can still get in and out of downtown. And with the commitment that you're making to these various communities, how are you doing a broad-based commitment to the various communities such as Sandusky, Ravenna, Springfield, as well as East Palestine?
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for the question. Sandusky is important to us. Sandusky is important. I've been to our Sandusky coal docks many, many times over my career. And I understand the situation that you're talking about. And we are on weekly calls with local officials to get that remediated and get that fixed as quickly as possible. We are paying for all repairs, and we've communicated this.
Great. Thank you.
Senator Ingram.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And first of all, let me apologize for my tardiness. So I didn't hear you speak all of your testimony. Thank you very much for being here today. And she took a little bit of the question that I had to ask, because part of my concern is that, yes, you are here in East Palestine, Palestine, sorry about that. And I'm glad to hear you're there for the long haul, which of course is, I think, everybody's concern, in making sure that the soil is tested, et cetera, on an ongoing basis. But what of those other municipalities that you run through and have run through for decades? What is your investment in making sure that they are safe? Let me just say, when I was a kid, we lived next to the railroad, and there were train dicks all the time doing what they had to do. And most people won't know what those folks are. But I don't see that. I don't hear of that anymore. I don't live by the train tracks anymore, but I don't see that anymore. So what is your responsibility for those other municipalities unless there's an incident? What are you prepared and what have you been doing? And say, I'm from Cincinnati, so along the route.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, thank you for that question. We are investing in the communities that we serve. We invested over $210 million in the state of Ohio alone. And we absolutely want to be good corporate citizens because our employees live in those communities as well. We have 13 employees who live in East Palestine. One of them invited me into his home. He's a union employee, worked in Conway, Pennsylvania, right across the state line. And in the immediate aftermath, he invited me into his home and introduced me to his wife and his 3-year-old daughter and invited some of his friends and their spouses. And as you can imagine, we had a really emotional conversation about the derailment, their fears and their concerns, and what they needed to see from Norfolk Southern and how Norfolk Southern could help. And I was so moved by that and struck by that as I left. And he was walking me to my car. I stopped him and I said, I want to give you a management job. And I want you to report directly into my office. And I'm going to give you $1 million. Not you personally, but I'm going to give you $1 million. And I want you to spend that in the community to help this community thrive. I want somebody on the ground who can talk directly to me and tell me what we need to do. So he had, one of his first things, he had this brilliant idea. The derailment happened on February 3rd, so flower sales for Valentine's Day were really depressed. And you can imagine how important flowers are on Valentine's Day. So we were concerned about the potential impact to the flower shop. And so Jeremy went and bought 100 arrangements from the flower shop. And then he and his Norfolk Southern colleagues delivered those to several of the retirement communities in the area. And, we got a lot of good feedback from the retirees' children because this, in East Palestine, it's a community. And people are proud to live there. They're proud that they live in East Palestine. They're proud of their neighbors. What you see is a lot of people after school will move away, but then they really want to get back. And so they come back and they raise a family. And so we're investing in that community, and we're doing what we can do to help.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that.
Senator Ingram,
Thank you,
follow
Mr.
up.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that very much, and I do feel your investment in Palestine. Here again, I want to know how you, as Norfolk Southern, plan to reach back to the rest of the industry, which just kind of rides through and keeps going in becoming good citizens, period, because you're not the only player. But how does it get back to the rest of the industry?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I've been in close communication with my peers at the CEO level in the rail industry and really encourage them to lean forward on rail safety issues as well. And again, I'm going to take the lead role in that. I'll be advocating for many of the provisions in the Vance-Brown bill.
Great. If I may, just one.
Senator Ingram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the AG's shutdown of the scam people, you're going to make sure that you're paying attention to where those dollars go also, or say making sure they get to not-for-profits, not just in Palestine, but anywhere else where there needs to be some emphasis on safety in some of those municipalities? Because somebody mentioned earlier about the technology and how it's changed. I just heard that by the time that some of those rail things heat up, it's too late. So, and I know you've said that you're on top of that, but I want to make sure that with the nonprofit side and the technology, all of that you're vested in making sure that it's not a, what is it? nsmakingitright.com. And that's great, but I want to make sure that it gets beyond just being another website.
Mr. Chair, Senator, it gets beyond another website by personal involvement.
Okay.
Right? The monetary reimbursement has to be a component of this. But one of the citizens of East Palestine, one of the firefighters, texted me after the first responder appreciation dinner the other night. And it was a thoughtful text, and he said, it's great that you're spending money here. What's really important is that you're personally here. That's how it gets beyond it. And I don't know if you were here, but I talked about the 300 employees that we have up in East Palestine 7 days a week who are working on environmental remediation, who are working on the community assistance, who are working on investing in East Palestine. And we're taking the lead from the community. We're going to bring the resources, and the community leaders will tell us where it needs to be directed.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Senator Antonio.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question. The legislature recently passed our transportation budget, and in that were some of the things that are also in the federal bills that you've mentioned. One of them was to make sure that the minimum is a two-person crew on all of the trains. Is that one of the elements in those pieces of legislation at the federal level that you support? That's one part of my question. The other part of my question is that enough, or have we been short-sighted with the minimum? Can you say a little bit about what you believe the minimum should be, I guess, on these trains with regard to crew members? Now, I know I will put the little caveat in there that I do know that on the East Palestine train, there were actually two crew members and a trainee. So I am aware of that. But if you could just speak to the number of crew members on the train.
Mr. Chair, Senator, we certainly support the legislative intent of any proposal to advance rail safety. As I noted before, we're data-driven, and we're going to follow the science. And at this point, I have not seen any data that provides a direct link between crew size and derailments.
Senator Hicks Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I really want to thank you for your coming, I believe your commitment. One of the things that happened in my part of the woods, we had a town hall, and there were some members of the union that were there, some retired, some current members. And what you're talking about in terms of really supporting the members of your team has not been translated to those men and women on the ground. So my question to you is, while you're doing these trainings in different parts of the state and the country and things like that, how well are you communicating this commitment to those members of the team that are on the ground throughout the country, so that they know that, since you've started, that you're making these types of headway and willing to support them, not only in terms of personnel on the teams, but giving them enough time to be able to do their jobs? Because one of the comments was made that because I asked the question about how long does it take to do the visual inspection, and the gentleman said it takes as long as it takes in order to make sure that when that train leaves the initial spot, that they've done all that they can do, and that they sometimes get I won't say disciplined, but they get comments about, can you hurry up, or you're holding up the train, etc. So there's a disconnect somewhat between what you're promoting at the top and to the men and women on the ground. So how would you are able to help clear that culture up so that everyone is moving in the same direction? Thank you. And again, thank you so much for being here and for your comments. I really do appreciate them.
Mr. Chair, Senator, as I noted, I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for what my craft colleagues do. It was so important to me that my first day as CEO of Norfolk Southern, a job that I wanted for a while, I wasn't at home celebrating with my family. I was in our crew rooms celebrating with my craft colleagues. I go out in the field quite a bit. The first place I go is a crew room, and I thank them for what they do for Norfolk Southern and for our customers and for the U.S. economy. And I tell them, I want to improve employee engagement. I want it to be better. And I ask them for their feedback and their insight. So it is very important to me. And as I noted, I've refreshed our operations leadership within my first year as CEO with a focus on service and safety. And that has to start with our personal engagement with my craft colleagues.
I had a question, Mr. Shaw. It's been announced that the schedule the trains are going to be ramping up again going through that area. Is there any kind of a new schedule change, or will it be the same way it was before? And could you just kind of give some reassurance to the people that the train's going through, everything's going to be good to go?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are operating trains through that area. We are operating them at restricted speed, slower speed, because we are working on the environmental remediation. We are placing wayside detectors on either side of East Palestine, and we are moving a automated inspection portal that we're working on with Georgia Tech outside of East Palestine.
I would like to thank you for coming today. I would just like to respectfully thank you for coming, because I know this is a burden on your company. I'd also like to ask when it's appropriate, if you could provide other information to the committee that would help us in the future with recommendations you see, either with some of the questions that you were not able to answer today with regards to the boxes or the cars, or other process things that we're interested in helping Ohio in the future, and appreciate your responsibility today. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we will have Art Arnold from the Rail Commission, the Rail Association, come forward. Just give us 1 second here, sir. You may proceed, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Chairman Reineke, Vice Chair Rulli, Ranking Member Antonio, members of the Senate Select Committee on Rail Safety, thank you for the opportunity to present testimony on Ohio's freight railroads. I am Art Arnold, the Executive Director of the Ohio Railroad Association. The ORA represents 28 freight railroads operating in Ohio. Railroads operate in 86 of the state's 88 counties. Norfolk Southern and CSX are our largest members and the railroads with the most extensive rail operations in both Ohio and the eastern half of the United States. The remaining members of the ORA operate with much smaller footprints. I think it's important for this committee to understand the state's rail system and how that system works. The network of rail lines is necessarily and fortunately interconnected in many locations, providing options for the rail shipper to maximize their use of both the state and national rail system. CSX and Norfolk Southern represent Class 1 railroads, the highest designation in the U.S. rail industry. There are only 6 freight railroads with this classification in North America. Ohio's rail network is comprised of roughly 5,100 miles of track. In 2016, that network carried almost 290 million tons of freight, roughly 1.2 million rail carloads, or a tonnage equal to approximately 13 million commercial truckloads. This freight was moved on a network that is privately owned, maintained, and operated. According to the Federal Railroad Administration, the U.S. freight rail network, consisting of almost 140,000 route miles, is widely considered the largest, safest, and most cost-efficient freight system in the world. In assessing the freight rail system, the Ohio State Rail Plan provides this perspective on Ohio's rail network. Ohio's network of active rail lines is the 4th most extensive in the nation, behind that of Texas, Illinois, and California. Because Ohio is geographically much smaller than either Texas or California, the Ohio rail network is more concentrated. Rail infrastructure is often sold or abandoned if its use does not justify cost to maintain and operate. If Ohio businesses did not use the rail network, it would not be as extensive. The high mileage of rail lines in Ohio reflects the close integration of rail with Ohio's economy, and our economy is built on industries that rely on freight rail. For example, manufacturing's total share of employment within Ohio is 46% higher than in other parts of the country. Within manufacturing, top sectors are steel manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, food and beverage manufacturing, and motor vehicle manufacturing. Each of these sectors is a heavy user of rail. I mentioned that the association had 28 member railroads. Most of these businesses are referred to as short line railroads. Short lines often provide first mile and last mile services to railroad customers. They are important for local economic development. It is usually less costly to locate industrial sites on short lines rather than build the necessary track infrastructure required by Class 1 railroads. Short lines also interchange with multiple Class 1 carriers, providing wider shipping options. Without long-haul freight, local railroads must focus on local service to survive and grow, so they maintain a strong focus on rail customers. All the railroads operating in Ohio have different operational and business challenges, but they have one thing in common. Each of them is required to observe the many federal regulations surrounding their operations. These federal regulations address nearly every aspect of freight rail, from the track structure to train speeds to reporting requirements. These regulations include the rail cars you see every day. Many of these cars are not owned by the railroad, but by the rail shipper or by rail car leasing companies. The rail system that supports the trains that move the million-plus rail cars in, out, around, and through Ohio is subject to extensive federal rules and oversight. The adherence to these rules is overseen by the Federal Railroad Administration's Office of Railroad Safety. This office promotes and regulates safety across the American railroad industry, encompassing all types of railroad operations. The staff includes nearly 400 federal safety inspectors who specialize in one of 6 technical disciplines focusing on compliance and enforcement. Those areas are grade crossings, hazardous materials, motive power and equipment, operating practices, signal and train control, and track. During the recent consideration of the state transportation budget, The industry shared more specific details on the role of federal regulatory oversight. We also talked about the operations of short-line railroads and how they differ from those of larger railroads. And we expressed our concerns with some of the requirements that were eventually included in House Bill 23. The rail industry has been comprehensively reviewing safety practices since the derailment in East Palestine. Every railroad that operates in Ohio reviewed their operating practices and safety measures. Norfolk Southern and CSX have both publicly shared the extensive steps they have undertaken to examine their operations. Over the past 2 months, both the FRA and the Association of American Railroads have issued advisories on rail operations. This has taken place in an industry where the safety record shows great progress over the past 20 years, as FRA data and numerous reports have described. Over 99% of trains operate safely from origin to destination, notwithstanding the railroad or any other variable. Rail transportation is the safest method of moving hazardous materials. Since the 1990s, derailments nationally have decreased by 85% due to improved operating rules, massive investments in track and equipment, and the voluntary application of technology to rail operations. More is being done to improve these numbers, but there is no magic wand. It takes time, resources, training, and investment. My fellow Ohioans should be encouraged to know that these are all being applied to improving rail safety in Ohio and across the country. As an example of safety training outreach, I've included an announcement of an upcoming training session in Zanesville for first responders. Other similar Ohio events organized in partnership with other railroads have already taken place, and more are scheduled. The rail industry's long-standing commitment to Ohio has resulted in tens of thousands of rail-dependent jobs and massive private investments by the businesses that rely on rail service. Ohio will remain an important location for railroads to operate, and rail will remain an important partner for these Ohio businesses and a linchpin for thousands of jobs. And safety will remain our top priority. The freight rail industry in Ohio and nationally is safe, and it is getting safer every year. That's happening through the efforts of individuals, companies, government agencies, and the industry as a whole. In closing, I'd like to offer that the Ohio railroad industry would like to be part of the solution for a better tomorrow. I respectfully suggest that any actions or recommendations by the committee actually benefits rail safety. And I do have some ideas I'd like to share with you. Some of those ideas are contained in House Bill 33. The budget bill is introduced. There was funding in that bill for improvements to rail infrastructure, particularly important to short-line businesses and short-line railroads. There's also a funding in there for the local share of a grade separation program that will help to ease the problem of block crossings all around the state of Ohio. I have to report that with the House's release yesterday of their sub-bill, the funding for the Rail Commission has been decreased, and the total funding for the grade separation program has been eliminated. So we will hope that the Senate will look into that because I think those are both important programs for rail safety. The last subject I'd like to offer is a partnership with the state on the subject of wayside detectors. By my calculations, we probably have close to 300 detectors on the ground in Ohio today. If you divide that by 5,100 miles of track, that's about an average of 17 miles between detectors. Not every railroad and not every stretch of track needs a detector. The rail operations are not going fast enough. There are not enough cars being moved. The weights of those cars and the contents of those cars make investments in wayside detectors on a substantial portion of Ohio's track, a misallocation of resources that could better be used for safety to improve the track structure and the operations of those railroads. So I would hope that we can continue those conversations as this committee goes forward. Thank you for the opportunity to share this background on the state's freight rail system.
I see Senator Hoagland is not here, so I would ask his question. Oh, here he is. Go ahead, sir.
No, actually, Chair, we've already asked Art here the question about chain of command. But I will ask, the bearing failure that happened in the train that went through East Palestine, do you know if that same bearing is being utilized in all the other trains? And is there any measures being taken to possibly remove that bearing and have that bearing replaced on the cars that still have that bearing, whether it be short line or the regular trains?
Chairman Reineke, Senator Hoagland, it would be conjecture on my part. I know what I think the answer is, but I will get an answer back to the committee on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Ranking Member Antonio.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Arnold, for coming in and testifying again. So, you know, it's interesting and sad that this current derailment in East Palestine is not the only one that's ever happened in East Palestine. And I did a little check of the history and find that while it has been about somewhere around 25 years since there's been a derailment there, over time, this community has really experienced quite a number of them. 1970 derailment, 1973. There's some that go back even further than that. And it's been pointed out, some folks have commented that, you know, it's a rural community, and that some of the issues that they've had were poor rail conditions has been identified over the years with some of the other derailments that happened. It took a long time to fix a bridge a long time ago. But I think it just points to this issue around where does the safety concerns become a priority over profit, basically, and can our huge systems of rail, we know it's been pointed out, it's been reinforced, this is still the best way to move products from point A to point B. So where are we, I think, post East Palestine's this derailment, where are we in terms of the prioritizing of safety becoming the top priority for the folks that you're dealing with?
Chairman Reineke, Senator Antonio, that's an easy question to answer because I think safety is the top priority for every one of our railroad members. There's been tremendous investment in the state. I'll point to the number of detectors that I mentioned. Those 300 detectors around the state have been millions of dollars. They've been invested over the last couple of decades here in the state of Ohio. That's all voluntary. The track improvements that take place, we have a short line railroad up in northwest Ohio, the Napoleon Defiance and Western, that was just rated the best short line railroad in North America for 2023. Not too many years ago, it was regarded as the worst railroad in the world. But that's the folks who came in, purchased that line, and working with the Rail Commission have, raised it from the bottom of the stack to the top. We are reducing derailments, as an example, railroad incidents overall in Ohio over the last 20 years based on the FRA statistics. Most of the derailments that take place in Ohio take place within a rail yard as they are switching from one track to another track. Those are not derailments that are anything like we have seen in East Palestine or Springfield. They are generally handled by the workers in that yard. The situation is getting better because safety has to be a priority. Nobody in this room, nobody outside of this room wants to see a rail car on the ground.
Follow-up.
Follow-up, Senator Antonio.
Thank you, Chair. I'll continue to, I'd like to echo one of my colleagues asked about to the head of Norfolk Southern about the disconnect between what we're hearing from the workers on the ground and the institutions and the companies. And so my hope is that there's some kind of a coming together of not just information, but that there's actions that show the workers that there is that commitment and priority of their safety as they're working as well. The other thing I'll say is that I'm disappointed to hear what you just told us about the budget right now, because we've been watching as that goes through both with the grade separations and the commission, and all I can tell you is they don't call us the upper chamber for nothing, and that my hope is that I think my colleagues and I hopefully will prevail when the budget comes to us in the Senate. Certainly it's a priority to me and my colleagues, I'm sure, as far as taking steps in the right direction towards the safety, because we know if our railroads are safe, then our communities are safe. So I don't know that I have a question other than just thanking you for sharing that information with us, and we will continue to advocate over here for that.
Senator Rovner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions were already asked, so I just have a very brief comment. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for bringing up the point regarding the operating budget and how those funds were stripped out. That is also very important to me, particularly the grade separation. I think that in my hometown, I see trains stopped on the tracks all the time. I've seen school buses full of kids doing 10-point turns, trying to get around it. So this is something that we absolutely need to address, and so I'll be happy to work with my colleagues to restore that. Thank you.
Senator Ingram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a brief question. When you talked about the detectors and how you have them, what's required, or it's like one every 17 miles, based on what we actually have, help me with when you talk about they're not needed, help me with what do you mean?
Senator Reineke, Senator Ingram, my point is that derailments like we saw in Springfield, like we saw in East Palestine, those kind of derailments are not happening because the operations on the short line railroads, which comprise roughly 40% of the state's rail network, don't operate at those speeds. Mm-hmm. They generally operate at a lower speed with fewer cars. And without the physics of the faster speeds and the heavier cars, the likelihood of a bearing going bad and that kind of a derailment is very negligible, which is evidenced by the research I can share with the committee on derailments, where they took place, and the reports on those derailments, if you want to sort of peel back the onion on derailments. That was my point on the detectors. The detectors are well placed on the higher speed, higher volume rail lines around the state. And as we heard today, there are more of those detectors that are going to go in on those rail lines. There are new detector types that are being, I guess I would say, field tested right now, if they're not already up and actually operating on some rail lines in other parts of the country. So that next technology is out there and it's coming. But specific to your question, that's how I was designating that it may be a misallocation of resources, because these short lines don't have the large customer base, the large revenues. The expense of detectors could be as much as $200,000 per installation. And for them to put that money into a detector where the likelihood of a derailment is very small, as opposed to putting that into ties and improving their track structure, the rail, is, in my view, a misallocation of those resources.
If you could provide that information through the chair, we'll distribute it to the members. Are there any other questions?
Can I follow up just a
Senator
little?
Ingram?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, they're not on the same rails. So short line and the Class A or Class 1 are not on the same rails.
Senator Reineke, Senator Ingram, the Class 1s generally have a different classification of track that allows them to operate at a higher speeds and carry the heavier rail cars. One of the efforts of the state is to try and make sure that we get all of the track up to that heavier weight standard, so you could put businesses anywhere around the state that can handle those kinds of rail cars. But most of the short lines in Ohio that I'm aware of do not operate at the same speeds as those Class 1 railroads.
Mr. Chair, if I may, it's just a...
Senator Ingram?
So the point being is because we don't have any money to waste, of course. We don't want to waste any money, but we want to make sure that then would there be restrictions from, say, the Class 1s being allowed to travel on any rail that is not Class 1? So then would we be separating the rail, and here the short lines, which you said is 40% of what's here anyway, would they be only allowed to travel on? Well, I guess it wouldn't make any difference if they're on the high speed because they're not going to be of speed. But how do we restrict that? Would there be a need to restrict who travels on what?
Senator Reineke, Senator Ingram, the discussions I've had with the Rail Commission about this idea of basically giving them the authority to review an application for a detector installation in a shared cost between the railroad and the state to put these detectors in. Let the third party representing the public interest take a look at these applications. The Rail Commission knows a tremendous amount about the rail system in Ohio. They understand that the allocation of those short line resources to detectors is probably not their best investment for safety. So my view is it's not a railroad making the decision. They would apply to the state and then let the State Rail Commission examine these various applications to see what they believe makes sense and what doesn't for the taxpayer.
Right, and I would never expect the rail, or I would never want the rail just to make the decision on their own. So anyway.
With no further questions, we thank you for coming, Mr. Arnold, and no further business before the committee. We hereby adjourned.